The roses at Westbury Manor were, like myself, bred for perfection. Each petal was engineered to unfurl in precisely the correct manner, each stem pruned to aspire to the heavens without a single unseemly droop. They were the envy of the county, and like myself, I suspected they occasionally longed for a bracing storm to come and ruin the whole tedious affair. For 20 years my life had been a masterclass in polite suffocation. As Lady Sybil Drayton, only daughter of the immensely powerful Duke Henry Drayton, my days were a tapestry of needlepoint poetry that rhymed too well, and silent dinners where the clinking of forks was the primary form of conversation. My father, a man whose influence could make kings tremble, treated me with the gentle condescending care one might reserve for a prize filly, an asset to be kept safe, polished, and eventually paraded before the right buyer. I played the part of the dutiful daughter to perfection, a role I had rehearsed for a lifetime, but my thoughts, the secret world inside my own head, were a far more dramatic and restless affair. The true drama of my life was about to begin, and its first act started, as such things often do, with a name spoken in anger. I was arranging flowers in the grand foyer, a task deemed suitable for my delicate sensibilities, when my father's voice cannoned out of his study. "Avalon," he roared, and the name echoed off the marble floor like a heresy in a cathedral. "The whelp dares to use that name. He thinks to resurrect a ghost. I buried the Avalons once. I will do it again. Avalon." The name was beautiful. It tasted of legend and mist. It did not belong in my father's mouth, especially not when it was twisted with such venom. I felt a prickle of something dangerously close to curiosity. That evening I staged my inquiry. As he swirled his brandy, I arranged myself artfully on the settee, a picture of innocent inquiry. "Father," I began, my voice pitched to the precise frequency of girlish curiosity, "who are the Avalons?" He stilled, the firelight catching the hard planes of his face. For a moment, I saw the predator from the study, but it vanished as he turned to me, his expression softening into its familiar mask of paternal indulgence. "An old family, my dear, long gone. Their name is of no consequence now," he smiled. "Nothing for a young lady to concern herself with." There it was, the gentle closing of the door, the soft turning of the key in the lock. But a seed had been planted. The name Avalon had taken root in the silent, fertile ground of my boredom. The house changed after that. More guards, their faces grim and unfamiliar, patrolled the stone walls that separated Westbury from the world. A new lock, a brutal fist of iron, was affixed to the garden gate. My gilded cage was shrinking. The day the curtain finally fell on my old life, the sky was a moody canvas of bruised purple and grey. A storm was coming. I felt it in my bones, a hum of exhilarating dread. I escaped to the rose garden, my mother's only real legacy, a place of chaotic beauty that defied my father's rigid order. I needed to breathe. I was tracing the velvety edge of a crimson rose when a man's voice, low and resonant, cut through the heavy air. "They say your mother's roses are the finest in England." I spun around. He was standing by the yew hedge, having appeared from the shadows as if conjured. He was not a servant, nor was he a lord of my acquaintance. His clothes were dark, impeccably tailored but made for movement, not for show. He was tall and lean, with the stillness of a hunter. His face was all sharp angles and severe lines, his dark hair swept back from a high forehead. But it was his eyes that held me captive. They were a startling, intelligent blue, and they were filled with a grief so profound it looked like anger. My heart gave a theatrical lurch. "You are on private property," I said, my voice betraying a tremor I despised. "Am I?" he asked, taking a slow step forward. "My ancestors are buried under this very soil. I believe that gives me more right to be here than the man who stole it." My blood went cold. Avalon. This had to be him. The ghost. The whelp. He was more substantial than I had imagined. "My father is the Duke," I said, the words a flimsy shield. "He does not steal." A bitter, sorrowful smile touched his lips. "Your father, Lady Sybil, is a master of transactions where the other party is left with nothing. Not even their life he was closer now." I could smell the scent of rain on his coat. He owes my family a debt of blood, land, and honor. It is long past time for collection. This has nothing to do with me, I whispered, panic clawing at my throat. His gaze was intense, unwavering. It felt as if he were seeing every performance, every polite lie I had ever told. It has everything to do with you, he said softly. You are his legacy, his pride, his most cherished possession. You are the final part of the debt. Before I could scream, before I could even think to run, he closed the distance between us. His hand grasped my arm. The grip was not brutal, but it was absolute. It was the grip of a man who had lost everything and had nothing left to fear. He led me through the hedge to where a formidable black horse stood waiting. He swung me into the saddle, my silk skirts tangling around me, and mounted behind me in one fluid motion. His arm came around my waist, a band of steel, his body a wall of warmth at my back. I was trapped. We rode into the teeth of the coming storm. I watched as Westbury Manor, the only world I had ever known, shrank behind me until it was just another light swallowed by the encroaching darkness. Hours later we arrived at a place that seemed born of the storm itself, a manor of dark, weathered stone. It stood stark and alone against the churning grey sea. Colbury Manor. It was not a home, it was a vigil. He lifted me down, his hands firm at my waist, and led me into a great hall that was vast, cold, and shadowed. The only sound was the howling of the wind and the crashing of the waves. I finally found the courage to face him, my fear burning into a hard knot of defiance. "What now?" I demanded. "Do you lock me in a tower?" Lord Lawrence Avalon looked at me, his blue eyes holding a universe of old pain. He seemed not to see a duke's daughter, but something else entirely. "No," he said, his voice echoing in the cavernous space. "You are quite safe from harm here, Lady Sybil." He took a step back, leaving me alone in the centre of the cold stone floor. "The only thing in this house that can hurt you is the truth. The truth, according to Lord Lawrence Avalon, lived in a house of cold stone and smelled of salt and sorrow. The great hall of Colbury Manor was a cavern of shadows, its high, vaulted ceiling lost in darkness. A single candelabra on a heavy oak table threw flickering, distorted shapes against the walls, making the faded tapestries seem to writhe with silent battles. Westbury was a stage for showcasing wealth. This place was a tomb for remembering it. A woman emerged from a darkened doorway. She was bone-thin and severe, her grey hair pulled back so tightly it seemed an act of self-punishment. Her face was a roadmap of a difficult life. "My lady," she said, her voice as brittle as a dead leaf, "I am Mrs. Croft. The master has ordered a room prepared for you, and a meal." Her tone suggested these were unfortunate necessities, not comforts. I was a thing to be managed, a piece of baggage to be stored. My defiance, my only real armour, began to reassert itself. "I have no intention of dining with my kidnapper," I announced, aiming for a voice of ice. Mrs. Croft's expression did not so much as flicker. "Lord Avalon does not make requests, my lady. He has set a place for you. You will join him." Her gaze was unnervingly direct. "There is little courtesy in this house, but we do not waste food. The master remembers what it is to be hungry." She turned and led the way up a grand, decaying staircase. The room she showed me to was clean but sparse. A heavy four-poster bed, a wardrobe and a single chair. The window, a tall, mullioned affair, looked out over the raging Black Sea. There was no escape. He did not need to lock the door. The cliffs and the ocean were my jailers. When I was summoned for dinner, I went, not out of obedience, but out of a burning need for answers. I would not be a passive victim cowering in my room. I would face my captor and demand the truth. I found him at the head of that long, dark table, the candelabra casting his face in sharp relief. We sat at opposite ends, separated by a chasm of polished, empty wood. Mrs. Croft served a simple meal of bread, cheese, and a thick stew before disappearing like a ghost. The only sounds were the howling of the wind and the clink of my fork against the plate. "You have questions," he said, breaking the silence. It wasn't a question. "I have accusations," I countered, setting my fork down. "You are a brigand and a liar. My father is one of the most respected men in England. The idea that he is a thief is laughable. He met my gaze, and his eyes were weary, as if he had been having this argument with my father's ghost for 20 years. 20 years ago, he began, his voice low and steady. Duke Henry Drayton and my father, Lord Alistair Avalon, were the closest of friends. They were partners. My father was the heart of their ventures. Your father was the shrewd mind. The Avalons had the ancient name, but the Draytons had the new money. I stared at him, my carefully constructed outrage beginning to falter. He spoke with such grim certainty. There was a bad investment, he continued, a single ship lost at sea. It was a setback, nothing more. But your father saw an opportunity. He used his connections at the bank to fabricate debts against my father's name. He produced false ledgers, called in loans that weren't due, and systematically dismantled my father's reputation. In less than 6 months, he had legally, brilliantly, and ruthlessly seized everything. The Avalon fortune, our London house, our lands, this house. A hysterical laugh bubbled in my throat. A children's ghost story, a convenient fiction to excuse your own family's failure. His mask of calm finally cracked. He slammed his hand on the table and the plates jumped. The violence was so sudden, so contained, it silenced me completely. Failure? He hissed, leaning forward into the light. Do you want to hear of failure, Lady Sybil? He had us thrown into a debtor's prison, a single filth-ridden room for 4 people. My mother, my father, myself, and my 10-year-old sister, Emily. He said her name as if it were a prayer. The raw pain in his voice was terrifyingly real. We starved. We ate watery broth and bread crawling with weevils while your father hosted galas on our stolen silver. My sister died of a fever in my mother's arms because we couldn't afford a doctor. My father died a month later, of what the world called grief, but what I call murder. He sank back into his chair, the fury draining out of him, leaving behind that profound, hollow grief. I could not breathe. My mind was reeling, trying to reject the horror of the images he painted. This could not be true. My father, who read me stories, who called me his jewel, who was a pillar of the realm. He was not that man. He could not be. Why, I whispered, the word torn from me. Why do this? Why not just demand money? I don't want his money, he said, his voice flat and dead. I want my family's name restored. I want him to stand before the world and confess what he did. He has ignored my letters for years. He has used his power to silence me at every turn, but he will not be able to ignore the absence of his precious daughter. He stood then, his tall frame a silhouette against the darkness. That is the truth, Lady Sybil. I do not expect you to believe it. You are his daughter after all. He looked at me, a flicker of something unreadable in his eyes. But in the quiet moments, in the dead of night, you will begin to wonder, and that is where his downfall will begin. He left me there, alone in the echoing silence of the hall. I sat for a long time, the food on my plate cold, his story a poison seeping into my soul. Lies, my mind screamed. All of it lies. But as Mrs. Croft came to silently clear the table, a memory surfaced, a small, strange thing from my childhood. I must have been 5 or 6. I'd asked my father about a little girl in a portrait that hung in the West Wing, a girl with dark hair and startlingly blue eyes. He had taken the painting down the very next day. He'd told me it was just an old painting he'd grown tired of. I now had a dreadful feeling I knew her name. I couldn't sleep. Lawrence's story echoed in the silence of my cold room. Lies, I told myself again and again. But then I'd remember the portrait my father hid, a little girl with Lawrence's exact same eyes. The doubt was a splinter in my mind. I had to know the truth. I had to find proof he was a liar. I slipped out of my room and moved silently through the dark, sleeping house. The eyes of dusty Avalon portraits seemed to follow me from the walls as I searched for anything, a letter, a ledger, some secret that would prove my father's innocence. At the end of a deserted wing, I found a room with the door left slightly ajar. It was a girl's bedroom, untouched for years, everything covered in a fine layer of dust. Emily Avalon's room. I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the cold. At the foot of the bed was a small wooden chest. My hands trembled as I forced the rusted clasp open. Inside, I found a small leather-bound diary. This was it. The ghost's testimony. I sat on the edge of the dusty bed and began to read. The first pages were full of happy, childish things. Then a name appeared that made my blood run cold. October 3rd. Uncle Henry came to visit today. He brought Sybil with him. She is very small and quiet, but her eyes are so clever. Papa says the Draytons are our dearest friends. I dropped the book. My own name. I was in her story. The foundation of my world began to crack. I forced myself to read on, my hands slick with a cold sweat. The entries quickly turned from cheerful to frightened. March 12th. Papa is so worried. He paces all night. He says Uncle Henry will not see him, and that the banks are making a mistake. Mamma cries when she thinks no one is looking. April 5th. We have to leave Colbury. The men with the papers said it is not ours anymore. They said it belongs to Duke Drayton now. Lawrence was so angry. He broke a vase. Then the final entries, the script growing weaker, written from a place she simply called the room. May 19th. It is so cold in here. I cannot stop coughing. Lawrence gave me his blanket, but he shivers so much now. I told him he should keep it, but he said Avalon heirs must always protect their sisters. The last entry was a barely legible scrawl. My brother is holding my hand. He says to be brave. It is hard to breathe. I'm so tired. It ended there. A dry, ragged sob tore itself from my throat. It was all true. The man I had called a monster was the boy who had given his dying sister his only blanket. My father, my protector, my hero, was the villain in a story more terrible than any I had ever read. The diary slipped from my numb fingers. An unbearable cold began to seep into my bones, a chill that had nothing to do with the draughty room. The world tilted, the walls of my life crashing down around me in a silent, deafening roar. The last thing I saw before the darkness swirled in was the pale light of dawn, illuminating a truth too terrible to bear. The first thing I was aware of was a voice, low and urgent, calling a name that felt both foreign and familiar. My name. Sybil, open your eyes. I was no longer on the floor of the cold, dusty room. I was in bed, buried under a mountain of heavy blankets, yet a fire seemed to be burning from the inside out. My body ached, and a shiver I couldn't control racked my frame. Lawrence Avalon stood over me, his face a grim mask. In his hand he held the diary. "Where did you find this?" he demanded, his voice rough. I tried to answer, but my throat was raw, and the word came out as a pained croak. I could only look at him, my eyes burning with fever and unshed tears. The sight of his sister's book in his hand, the truth now between us, was too much. A sob escaped me. His harsh expression faltered. The anger in his eyes was replaced by something else, something deeply conflicted. He looked from the diary to my face, and the hard lines of his jaw seemed to soften. "Mrs. Croft," he called, his voice sharp. The severe housekeeper appeared at the door. "Bring cool water and cloths, and broth. She's burning with fever." "The chill from that room," Mrs. Croft began, her voice flat. "It takes hold of the unwary." For the next day, or perhaps two, I lost all track of time. The world was a blur of heat and shivering, of nightmares and brief moments of pained consciousness. Through it all, there was a constant, steady presence. I expected it to be Mrs. Croft, but it was him. It was always him. I would wake to the feel of a cool, damp cloth on my forehead, and his face would be there, etched with exhaustion and a strange, fierce concentration. He would lift my head, urging me to drink water or broth, his touch surprisingly gentle, his voice a low, steady murmur. In my delirium, the lines between past and present blurred. I was in the cold room with Emily. Then I was a child at Westbury, watching my father take down the portrait. I murmured her name. I'm sure of it. I felt a profound, aching sorrow not for myself, but for the boy who had given his sister his blanket, for the man who had been forced to carry that ghost alone for 20 years. One evening, the fire finally broke. The shivering subsided, and the sweat on my skin was cool instead of burning. I opened my eyes, and they were able to focus for the first time in days. He was asleep in the chair by my bed, his head slumped against his chest. In repose, with the anger and grief stripped away, he looked younger, vulnerable. A dark lock of hair had fallen across his forehead. Without thinking, my hand lifted, my fingers ghosting over his cheek. It was an instinct, a foolish, tender impulse to offer a comfort I didn't know I possessed. His eyes snapped open, the startling blue of them clear and sharp, locked with mine. He didn't pull away. He simply watched me, his expression unreadable. "I'm sorry," I whispered, my voice raspy but clear. "For your sister. For everything." The words hung in the silent room, simple and true. It was the one thing no one had said to him in 20 years. A storm of emotion passed through his eyes, grief, shock, and something else I couldn't name. He leaned forward, his hand coming up to cup my face, his thumb stroking my cheekbone. The cold, vengeful Lord Avalon was gone. In his place was a man drowning in a pain I now understood. "Don't be," he said, his voice thick with an emotion he couldn't hide. "It was not your fault." He looked at my lips, and the air in the room grew thin, charged with a sudden, impossible tension. My heart, which I thought too weary to feel anything but sorrow, gave a slow, heavy thud. He closed the small distance between us and pressed his mouth to mine. It was not a kiss of passion, but of desperation. It was a kiss of shared grief, of a truth finally acknowledged. It was soft and searching, and it tasted of sorrow and a strange, fragile hope. It lasted only a moment, but it was long enough to shatter what was left of the world I knew. He pulled back, his eyes wide with a stunned, shared shock. We stared at each other in the candlelight, the silent question of what we had just done hanging between us. And I knew, with a terrifying certainty, that nothing would ever be the same. The moment the kiss ended, the world rushed back in. The howling of the wind, the crackle of the candles, the sudden deafening silence between us. Lawrence pulled away as if burned, his eyes wide with a look of horrified shock. He had not planned that. I had not expected it. It was a fault line that had just cracked the world open. Without a word, he stood, turned, and walked out of the room, leaving me alone with the ghost of his touch on my lips. The next 2 days were a masterclass in avoidance. Lawrence did not return. Mrs. Croft brought my meals, her face as impassive as ever, offering no information. I was left in the crushing silence of my room to recover my strength and endlessly replay the kiss in my mind. What had it meant? Was it a moment of pity for a sick girl? An impulsive act he now regretted? My inner theatrical voice had no witty retort for this. I was adrift in a sea of confusion. He had held my life in his hands as a captor, and it was terrifying. He had held my face in his hands as he kissed me, and it was infinitely more so. The old Sybil would have waited. She would have stayed in her room, the passive pawn in another's drama. But the old Sybil had been buried in the dust of Emily Avalon's room. On the 3rd day I got out of bed. I was weak, my legs unsteady, but my resolve was a rod of iron in my spine. I would not be avoided. I would not allow that moment to be erased by silence. I found him in the library, a vast cold room where the books on the shelves were the only witnesses to his vigil. He was standing before a tall window, staring out at the churning grey sea. He did not turn when I entered. "You've been avoiding me," I said, my voice stronger than I expected. He remained facing the window. "You were recovering. I thought it best to give you space." It was a polite, distant lie. "Did you?" I walked further into the room, my slippers silent on the threadbare rug. "Or were you giving yourself space?" He finally turned, his face guarded, the cold mask of Lord Avalon firmly back in place. The kiss was a mistake. A consequence of exhaustion and circumstance. It meant nothing. The words were meant to be a dismissal, a final closing of the door, but I was tired of doors being closed in my face. "It did not feel like nothing," I said softly, holding his gaze. "You once told me that the only danger in this house was the truth. Are you afraid of it now, my lord?" That hit its mark. A muscle in his jaw clenched. "The truth," he said, his voice low and tight, "is that you are the daughter of the man who murdered my family." The truth is that I brought you here as leverage in a war. There is no room for anything else. And was it nothing when you stayed by my bed while I was ill, I challenged, taking a step closer? Was it nothing when you gave me water from your own hand? You can hide behind your revenge, but I saw you. I know it's not all you are. His control shattered. He crossed the space between us in 2 long strides, his eyes blazing with a tormented fire. And what am I, Lady Sybil? A monster to forgive? A tragedy to pity? I am the man who must destroy your father. Do not forget that. I will never forget what my father did, I said, looking up at him without flinching. And I will never forget that you are the boy who gave his dying sister his blanket. His breath hitched. The fight went out of him, replaced by a raw, haunting vulnerability. We stood there inches apart, trapped in the same terrible story. We are both haunted, Lawrence, I whispered, using his given name for the first time. Pretending that kiss didn't happen won't change that. He looked at me for a long, agonizing moment, his expression a storm of conflict. Finally, he gave a slow, weary nod. He was not conceding to romance. He was conceding to the truth. No, he said, his voice ragged. It won't. He took a step back, creating a space between us that felt both safe and like a terrible loss. You are no longer a prisoner here, Sybil, but you cannot leave. I cannot let you go until this is finished. I understood. I was not his captive, but I was not free. We were not enemies, but we were not allies. We were something else entirely, something new and undefined, trapped together in the quiet space between a sworn vow and an impossible kiss. The days that followed were a quiet, fragile truce. The titles of captor and captive had been burned away in the fever, leaving us with nothing to define ourselves. We were simply Sybil and Lawrence, 2 ghosts haunting the same house, bound by a history that was not our own. We ate our meals in a tense, shared silence. I would read in the library while he worked on his ledgers in the study. We were 2 planets in a strange, solitary orbit, intensely aware of each other's gravity but never touching. He had seen the truth in my eyes, and I had seen the man behind the vow of vengeance. The unspoken thing that had passed between us, that soft, desperate kiss, was a constant presence in the air. This fragile peace was shattered on a Tuesday night. I was in the library, reading by the fire, when a crash of shattering glass exploded from the great hall. It was followed by the splintering crack of the main door being forced from its hinges. My blood ran cold. Before I could even stand, Lawrence was there, bursting into the room. The quiet, brooding man was gone, replaced by someone sharp, dangerous, and instantly in command. "They've come," he said, his voice a low, urgent growl. His eyes were not on the door, but on me. "Stay behind me. Do not leave this room." Heavy, booted footsteps echoed on the stone floor of the hall, followed by the sound of a struggle. I heard Mrs. Croft's husband, the groundskeeper, cry out in pain. Lawrence grabbed a heavy iron fire poker, his knuckles white. "My father wants his property back, Avalon," a rough voice bellowed from the hall. "He said to tell you he always collects what he's owed." My father. These were his men. He had not sent a rescue party. He had sent thugs. The realization was a punch to the gut. He would rather see this house torn apart and this man killed than have the truth of his past exposed. 2 men, burly and dressed in dark, practical clothes, filled the library doorway. "There she is," one of them grinned, his eyes landing on me. "The Duke's little jewel. Come along quietly, my lady, and we'll try not to hurt your host too badly." Lawrence moved to stand directly in front of me, shielding me with his body. "You will not touch her," he said, his voice lethally calm. The men laughed and charged forward. What followed was a blur of brutal, efficient violence. Lawrence was not just a lord, he was a fighter. He moved with a speed and ferocity that was terrifying, using the heavy poker to block and strike. But it was 2 against 1. While Lawrence was occupied with the first man, the second lunged for me. "The Duke said to bring you back," he sneered, grabbing my arm. "He didn't say in how many pieces." Panic gave way to a white-hot rage. This man, sent by my own father, was going to hurt me. Lawrence saw it. He shoved his opponent away and threw himself toward me. He got between us, but he wasn't fast enough to avoid the heavy cudgel the man swung. It caught Lawrence high on the arm with a sickening thud. He grunted in pain, but didn't falter. using his body to slam the man against a bookshelf. Seeing Lawrence hurt, seeing my father's cruelty made manifest in this room, something inside me snapped. I grabbed a heavy leather-bound book from the table and brought it down with all my might on the first man's head as he scrambled to his feet. The blow was clumsy, but it was enough. He staggered, stunned. The fight ended as quickly as it began. Seeing their advantage was lost, the two men backed away and fled into the night. Silence descended, thick and suffocating, broken only by our ragged breaths. The library was in ruins. Books were scattered, a chair was overturned, and the air was thick with the scent of violence. Lawrence was leaning against the wall, his face pale, his left arm hanging limp at his side. Dark blood was already soaking through the sleeve of his white shirt. "Are you hurt?" he asked, his first thought still for me. "No," I whispered, my voice trembling. I walked toward him, my eyes fixed on the blood. My father's men had done this. My father had sent them to hurt, perhaps even to kill. And this man, my captor, my enemy, had bled to protect me. I reached him and, without thinking, tore a long strip from the hem of my cotton petticoat. My hands shook as I pressed the makeshift bandage against the wound on his arm. "Hold this here," I commanded, my voice gaining a strength I didn't know I had. "Press hard." He did as I said, his eyes never leaving my face. In that moment, surrounded by the wreckage, with the smell of blood in the air, the last of my old life fell away. The roles had been violently, irrevocably reversed. My father was the monster who sent brutes into the dark, and the man before me, the ghost of Colbury Manor, was the one who had shielded me with his own body. He was my protector. His eyes never left mine as I held the makeshift bandage to his arm. The chaos of the fight receded, leaving a ringing silence that was more intense than all the violence that had come before. In that quiet, wrecked room, we were no longer Lord Avalon and Lady Drayton. We were just Lawrence and Sybil, survivors covered in dust and touched by blood. "Let me see it," I said, my voice quiet but firm. I led him to the kitchen, where Mrs. Croft, her face pale but her hands steady, had already set out a basin of hot water, clean cloths, and a bottle of harsh-smelling antiseptic. She gave a single sharp nod and left us, granting us a privacy the crumbling walls of the manor rarely afforded. I gently pushed the torn, bloody sleeve of his shirt up his arm. The gash from the cudgel was deep and ugly. My stomach turned, but I pushed the feeling down. I would not be the fragile, fainting lady he first thought he'd captured. I worked in silence, cleaning the wound with a focus I didn't know I possessed. His skin was warm beneath my fingers. I could feel the hard muscle of his arm, the tremor of pain he refused to show. He watched my every move, his expression unguarded, his breath catching softly when the antiseptic stung. In that moment, he was not a captor, a lord, or a vengeful ghost. He was just a man who had been hurt, and I was the one tending to him. After I had cleaned and tightly bandaged the wound, I finally met his gaze. The silence had to be broken. He spoke first, his voice a low, ragged thing. "He would have hurt you. Your father." It was not an accusation. It was a statement of raw, painful fact. "Yes," I whispered, "he would have." "When I brought you here," he continued, looking at his bandaged arm as if he didn't recognize it, "you were a symbol. A piece in a game, my father's jewel to be taken from his crown." He finally looked up at me, his eyes filled with a raw, agonizing honesty. "It is not that simple anymore." My heart ached for him, for me, for the terrible, tangled mess of it all. "Tonight," he said, his voice dropping even lower, "when I saw that man reach for you, my vow of revenge meant nothing. All that mattered was keeping you safe." This was his confession, not of love, but of something more elemental, a shift in the very foundation of his world. He had put my safety before his life's mission. Now it was my turn to confess. "For 20 years, I said, my voice clear and steady, I have been his property, his jewel, his asset, his perfect daughter. Tonight, he sent men to collect what he owned." I took a deep breath, the words tasting of ash and freedom. "I am not his property anymore. I will not go back to him. I will not be a piece in his game or in yours. I stood from my chair and faced him, my equal. You told me you wanted him to confess. You told me you wanted justice for what he did to your family. I looked him straight in the eye, my old life burning to embers behind me. I want that too, for Emily, for your father, for the truth. I held out my hand. I am on your side, Lawrence. Not as a hostage, not as a prize to be won or bartered, as an ally. We will see this through to the end, together. He stared at my outstretched hand as if it were a lifeline. The war inside him was visible on his face, 20 years of hatred for the name Drayton warring with the woman standing before him. Slowly, as if it took all the strength he possessed, he reached out with his good hand and took mine. His grip was warm and firm. It was not a promise of romance, but of partnership. It was a vow made in the quiet aftermath of violence, a silent agreement to face the coming storm as one. The war was not over. In fact, it had just truly begun. But for the first time I was not afraid. I was no longer a jewel in a gilded cage. I was a sword, and I had just chosen my side. In the quiet aftermath of the attack, Colbury Manor transformed. It was no longer my prison, it was our fortress. The tense silence between Lawrence and me was replaced by a shared, focused purpose. We spent our days in the dusty library, poring over old Avalon ledgers and journals. I, who had been raised to do little more than embroidery, discovered I had my father's head for numbers and a keen eye for discrepancies. Lawrence would watch me, an expression of grudging admiration in his eyes. We were a team. We rarely spoke of the kiss, or of the blood spilled in the library, but the memory of it was a current running beneath every quiet moment, binding us together. This new fragile peace was shattered by the arrival of a ghost from my past. An old family retainer, a man I'd known since childhood, arrived at the gate bearing a single cream-coloured envelope sealed with the Drayton crest. My father had found a way to breach our walls, not with force, but with a memory of home. Lawrence brought the letter to me in the library, his face an unreadable mask. "It is for you." My hands trembled as I took it. The weight of it, the familiar scent of my father's expensive paper, was enough to transport me back to my gilded cage. I broke the seal and read. The letter was not what I expected. There was no anger, no command. It was a masterpiece of loving manipulation. "My dearest Sybil, I have been mad with worry. To know that you are alive is the only thing that has kept me from levelling that decrepit manor to the ground and salting the earth where it stands. I know what lies that man has been telling you. Avalon is a name synonymous with failure and bitterness. He is unwell, my dear, poisoned by a tragic history of his own family's making. He has trapped you in his delusions, and my only wish is to bring you home, away from his madness. Business is a brutal world. The Avalons made poor decisions, and I did what any father would do to protect his own family and legacy. He twists history to suit his narrative of grievance. I had to pause, my breath catching in my throat. It was so reasonable, so convincing. It was the voice of the man who had raised me. The last paragraph was the true poison. "I only want you to come home. Remember how we used to walk in the rose garden after the rain, and you would tell me the water droplets were diamonds. The roses are waiting for you, Sybil. All you must do is walk away from that place. There will be no consequences, no scandal, only my forgiveness and the life you were always meant to have. Your loving father, Duke Henry Drayton." The letter fell from my fingers. For a dizzying, terrible moment I was tempted. He was offering me an escape from the cold, the ghosts, the impossible fight that lay ahead, an escape back to a world of comfort and beauty, where the only thing required of me was to believe the lie. The memory of the roses, of the smiling, indulgent father, was a siren song. Lawrence, who had been watching me from across the room, said nothing. He simply waited. I picked up the letter, my resolve hardening. The man who wrote those loving words was the same man who had sent thugs to attack us. The roses he spoke of were fertilized by the bones of the Avalon family. I walked over to Lawrence, my steps even and sure. I did not speak. I simply handed him the letter. He read it, his expression hardening with each line. A quiet, dangerous fury emanated from him as he saw the full extent of my father's cunning. He saw the love, The lies and the poison, all twisted together. When he finished, he folded it carefully and handed it back to me, his eyes searching mine. He did not tell me what to think. He did not tell me what to do. He did not call my father a liar. His silence was a profound act of trust. He was letting me make my own choice. Even if it meant I might choose to leave him, I stood there holding the letter. In one hand was the gilded promise of my past, a life of ease built on a foundation of lies. In the other, represented by the silent watching man before me, was a future of hardship, but one built on the bedrock of truth. I looked from my father's elegant script to Lawrence's waiting, haunted eyes. My choice was clear. I turned and walked toward the fireplace, where a low fire burned against the ever-present chill of the manor. The letter felt heavy in my hand, a final chain linking me to a life I no longer wanted. The time had come to break it. I did not hesitate. I held the letter out over the low-burning fire, the expensive paper curling in the heat. My father's elegant lying script turned brown, then black. I watched his words of love and poison burn until they were nothing but a fragile, glowing skeleton of ash. Then I let go. The last of my old life drifted down into the embers and was gone. A long, quiet breath escaped Lawrence's lips from across the room. It was a sound of profound relief. He walked over to me, stopping just behind my shoulder as we both stared into the fire. "You chose the truth," he said, his voice quiet, with an emotion I couldn't quite name. It sounded like awe. "I chose my own side," I replied, turning to face him. "Burning a letter is a symbolic gesture. It isn't justice." A new fire, one of cold, hard purpose, was burning at my chest. "Your plan was to use me as leverage to force a confession. I have lived with that man for 20 years. My father will never confess. He will see us both dead before he allows his reputation to be tarnished." Lawrence's jaw tightened. He knew I was right. "Then what do we do?" "We stop playing his game," I said, my mind suddenly, terrifyingly clear. "We stop waiting for him to act. We bring the war to him." I began to pace, the energy of a lifetime of silent observation finally finding its voice. My father's power does not come from his wealth, not really. It comes from his name, his reputation as an honorable, unimpeachable man. That is where we must strike. "How?" "We don't need a confession if we have proof," I said, my eyes locking with his. "You have your father's old ledgers. I know my father's business. We will find the discrepancies. We will find the proof of the fraud." I stopped pacing, my plan forming with perfect, ruthless clarity. "And then we will not present it to him. We will present it to the world." "The courts are in his pocket," Lawrence countered, his voice grim. "I am not talking about the courts. I am talking about the court of public opinion," I said. I knew my father's calendar, his society, his stage. In 3 weeks, he is hosting the annual Governor's Ball at Westbury. It is the highlight of the social season. Everyone who matters will be there. His friends, his rivals, his political allies. It will be his moment of ultimate triumph. A slow, dangerous smile touched my lips. And it will be the stage for his ruin. For the first time since I'd met him, a genuine, startlingly boyish grin spread across Lawrence Avalon's face. The sight of it sent a dizzying warmth through my chest. The ghost was gone, replaced by a co-conspirator. "A public execution," he murmured, the idea taking hold. "I like it." The days that followed were the most alive I had ever felt. We were a team, a secret council of 2. We spent hours locked in the library, his father's old, faded ledgers spread across the table next to my own memory of my father's business dealings. He had the history, I had the context. Together we were a formidable weapon. We found it late one night, a single falsified entry, a ghost in the numbers that, once discovered, unraveled the entire lie. It was the key, the proof. That night, we stood over the table, the evidence before us, our shoulders brushing. The air was thick with the thrill of the hunt and the unspoken thing that had grown between us. "He will not expect it," Lawrence said, his voice a low hum. "He will be looking for a frontal assault, not a dagger in a ballroom." "He taught me my entire life that the drawing room is the true battlefield," I replied. He just never imagined I would be the one leading the charge against him. Lawrence turned to me, his blue eyes searching my face in the dim candlelight. The question of our future, of what would happen after the battle was won, hung between us. But for now, the fight was everything. "Are you ready for this, Sybil?" he asked, his voice soft. "To go back there? To face him?" I thought of the timid girl who had trembled in the rose garden. She was gone. I looked at the man before me, my ally, my partner. I thought of the justice we would bring for his family. A small, genuine smile touched my lips. "My lord," I said, my voice full of a confidence I had never known. "I have been rehearsing for this role my entire life." 3 weeks later, I returned to Westbury Manor. I did not arrive as a disgraced daughter, but as an invading queen. Lawrence was at my side, his presence a quiet, formidable strength. The manor blazed with light, a glittering jewel box of music and laughter, completely oblivious to the reckoning that was about to arrive. We moved through the ballroom, a sea of silks and jewels parting before us. Whispers followed in our wake. The notorious Lord Avalon, the ghost of a ruined family, and with him the Duke's lost daughter, looking not like a victim, but like a woman with a purpose. I saw my father, Duke Henry Drayton, across the room. He was holding court, a magnanimous king in his castle, the very picture of power and honour. He saw me, and his eyes widened in shock, then narrowed with fury. He started towards us, but he was too late. I had already chosen my stage. I stepped onto the musician's dais, and Lawrence joined me, a protective, unwavering shadow at my back. The music faltered, then died. A hush fell over the glittering crowd. Every eye in the room was on us. "Good evening," I began, my voice clear and carrying to every corner of the vast room. "I apologize for the interruption. My name is Sybil Drayton, and I have a story to tell you." My father had stopped dead, his face a mask of disbelief. "Many of you know the story of the Avalon family," I continued, my gaze sweeping across the stunned faces. "A sad tale of a noble house that fell into ruin. But you do not know the truth. The truth is that they did not fall. They were pushed." "Sybil, that is enough," my father boomed, his voice shaking with rage. "You are unwell. This man has poisoned your mind." "Has he?" I asked, my voice dangerously calm. "Or has he simply shown me the proof?" On cue, Lawrence stepped forward. He held up the leather-bound ledger. "In this book," he announced, his voice ringing with the authority of 20 years of buried truth, "is the proof of my father's ruin. Proof of fabricated debts, of falsified accounts, of a systematic fraud perpetrated by his closest friend, Duke Henry Drayton." He laid out the crime with cold, irrefutable clarity. A gasp rippled through the crowd. Men who had built their own fortunes on the Duke's advice looked at him with new, calculating eyes. His rivals began to smile. "This is slander, lies," my father roared, his composure finally shattering. "Then prove it," I challenged, my voice cutting through his rage. "Open your books. Show them the transactions. Show them the truth of how you acquired Colbury Manor and the entire Avalon fortune for a pittance." He couldn't. The truth was there, in the sudden pallor of his skin, the frantic, cornered look in his eyes. He was ruined, not by a court of law, but by the court of opinion, the only one he had ever truly cared about. In a single devastating moment, his empire of reputation crumbled to dust. We did not stay to watch the fallout. We turned and walked out of the ballroom, leaving the scandal to fester behind us. We didn't stop until we were in the cool, quiet dark of the rose garden. The war was over. The ghosts were at peace. We stood in silence for a long time, the scent of rain-dampened roses filling the air. "It's done," I whispered. "It's done," he confirmed. He turned to me, his face illuminated by the moonlight. The vengeful lord was gone, leaving a man I had come to know better than myself. "My quest is over, Sybil, and I find myself at a new beginning." He took a step closer, his hand coming up to gently cup my cheek. "I set out to reclaim my family's name, to find justice. I never expected to find you." His voice was a low, raw murmur. "I have loved you, I think, since the moment you looked at me with fire in your eyes and called me a liar. I love you, Sybil Drayton." Tears I didn't know I was holding welled in my eyes. "You opened my cage, Lawrence," I said, my voice thick with emotion. "You showed me the truth, even when it was terrible. I don't want the life my father built. I want a life with you." He smiled, a true breathtaking smile of pure joy, and lowered his head to kiss me. It was not a kiss of grief or desperation, but one of profound love, an infinite promise. It was the kiss of a beginning, not an end. We left Westbury that night and never looked back. We returned to Colbury Manor, but it was not the same house I had arrived at as a captive. It was no longer a tomb of ghosts, but a sanctuary of hope. Standing on the cliffs with Lawrence's arm around me, I looked at the dark, formidable stone and saw not a prison, but a home, our home, and I knew with a joyful certainty that I would fill its quiet gardens with roses,